What's up, y'all? Today I'm going to tell the story about the time that I went to Leigh McCloskey's library, and he let us in his house and we got to check out all of his art studio and his library that he covered entirely in paint. All of the spines of the books, all the bookshelves, everything, the floor, it was all covered in paint, and it was really magical. So that's what we're going to get into today. So if you've been watching my videos up until this point, welcome back. This is not a trip report necessarily, but it was quite an experience. So in a way, this is a real life trip report. This is something that has had a profound effect on me, and I still think about it a lot. So I'm excited to share this with you guys. So the way this all started was actually in around 2010. I saw the album artwork for Flying Lotus album, Cosmogramma. It has a very cosmic vibe to it, and I remember the very first time I saw it, it struck something in me. It struck some kind of primordial chord, almost like it hit a note inside of me. Something spoke to me when I saw this artwork for the first time. So what happens next is that I saw a video on YouTube about the Flying Lotus artwork. So I saw that he had collaborated with this guy, Leigh McCloskey. There was a little YouTube video that they made talking about the Cosmogramma artwork and Leigh McCloskey just doing his usual philosophizing. He's like the wise sage, he's always got something to say. I come across this video of Leigh McCloskey and Flying Lotus, and they're talking about this artwork, and it shows the inside of his living room, which is just covered in paint, from the floor to the shelves, and all of his big paintings that he actually has on canvas. When I saw that, I became extremely interested. So I started looking more into Leigh McCloskey. I searched him up on YouTube, and I came across a few videos of people taking tours in his library in his home. So the name of the library is called THOTHS, and it's a acronym that stands for the hieroglyph of the human soul. My interest was totally piqued, and in about 2015, my band was going on tour for the first time. So we were heading out to California, and I knew we were gonna be in LA for a day, so I sent an email to Leigh McCloskey. I knew that he was aware of this psychedelic archetypal world, so I used language in the email that signified that I was somebody who's really deeply into this. I said something along the lines of I wanted to come visit because it was my alchemical pilgrimage, and he seemed to respond well to that, and we made plans to go and visit whenever we were in town. This was in the middle of a tour. We were on our way from Texas to California. We get to California for the very first time, so this is all my very first time being on the West Coast, and compared to the humid heat of Houston and the arid heat of Arizona where we were just the day before, California was like a freaking paradise. It was just so cool, the nice weather, the nice views, the nature. Yeah, so we get to Leigh McCloskey's house in Malibu. This is the first time I've ever been there. And obviously Malibu is super like high end, you know, all these rich Hollywood people live out there. So I was very surprised to see, you know, how beautiful the natural environment was in Malibu. It was very like hilly. You see off the edge of these cliffs into the ocean, all of these gardens and flowers and wildlife. And I remember having the feeling, you know, feeling that like perfect temperature. You know how you feel like you're in equilibrium whenever it's perfect outside, you know, 74 degrees and flawless weather. I felt like I could see the plants just like basking in the sun, just enjoying that perfect weather and just beautiful views. It was very like heavenly. So we get to Leigh McCloskey's house, and we didn't know him at the time, so we introduced ourselves, and it was me and the band. So we said, we're Tyler, Chris, and Chris. And right away, he made a joke about how Tyler, Chris, and Chris sounds like the name of an English comedy. Leigh McCloskey is professionally an actor, so That's where his mind's at. He's thinking of theatrics and plays and movies and stuff. That's where he's coming from. He got a good laugh out of that. And when we met, I think he realized that we were pretty young because he asked our age pretty soon after we got there. At the time I was 22, the other guys were 21. And then he mentioned something about being, I think he had just turned 60 just a few days before. So he was talking about how he felt like it was probably time for him to start passing on knowledge as some kind of elder or some kind of sage. It seemed like he was a little reluctant to admit that he was getting into his later age, but he seemed to embrace the role as far as passing down wisdom. And so when he said that, I was like, yes, you know, this is exactly what I'm here for. So far so good. You know, I was treating this as like going to see the Jedi Master. This is like the young Padawans going to see the Master, and he delivered. So we go in the house, we meet his lovely wife, Carla. She's just the sweetest lady, and they're making us feel so welcome, you know, which is pretty rare because when do you really invite complete strangers into your home and just trust them? You know, they were taking a risk, but I think because I reached out and said, you know, that I was on this alchemical journey, they recognized that we were people who really cared and were interested about that. There's 2 floors when you walk in. On the first floor, going around all of the walls, he has all of his tarot cards, which he himself designed and revisioned. He has his own tarot set called Tarot Revisioned. And so he has them like one plaque here, one here, one here, one here, all 22, just going all the way around. And that this was the base of his library, which is on the floor right above. And he had some really cool thing to say about the connection of that being on the ground level and then his art studio being on the second floor right above that. So we start going up the stairs and already we're just like being moved deeply. I remember that on our way up the stairs, Chris saw something. It was a painting that he saw that had this blend of geometry and organic. And usually you think of those two things as it's one or the other, but a real skillful artist can blend those two things seamlessly together. And I remember Chris saying that when he saw that, he felt like moved by it and that he felt like he almost wanted to cry. So this is just walking upstairs to the library. So already things are like rolling. So we get upstairs to the library, aka THOTHS, and it's just overwhelming, man. I had seen videos of it at that point because that's how I knew what I was getting into, is I saw the videos of other people getting the tour, but it's something else whenever you see it in person, just to see the incredible like tiny details that cover the entire place. And his paintings are magnificent. This guy is like a low-key Leonardo da Vinci. Like, I really think he's a genius, and because he's not actively selling his art in the marketplace, I feel like he's not very well known. But in my eyes, this guy's a genius. And so here we are in the lair of this amazing visionary artist. So I'm gonna try to find a link for an example of someone taking this tour through the library. There's actually several, so I would recommend just searching YouTube for Leigh McCloskey THOTHS or Leigh McCloskey Library and check a couple of them out, because I feel like you get something different out of each one. Another reason that I think you should check that out is because I really can't tell the story and explain it nearly as well as Leigh himself did, but I'll go over some of the things that I remember that were particular to our experience. So first of all, he said that this whole thing started for him, this process of covering his entire library in paint. It started for him on 9/11, the day the towers came down. I think he really felt a true sense of grief and confusion and darkness. The reason that I mention this is because he started his work the day 9/11 happened. He's told me that he fell to his knees, he just started painting away on his linoleum floor. He has this very relatable way of making art where he follows riffs. And this is something I can really relate to because he takes the stance of an improviser, like an improvisational musician, where he's not going into this with a deliberate plan of execution. He is following the rhythm of his hand and following the deep unconscious pathways that we can only take a step back from. I think that's where a lot of the truly best art comes from, is deep in the unconscious. So I believe that he's channeling things that the conscious mind simply could not do on its own. So we're taking the tour through his library, and you get to put on these 3D glasses, and it's this whole experience. There's like this one where you walk up to a mirror and then you put your hands on the sides of the mirror, and then Leigh's talking to you and he's talking about all of these different like meanings. He's bringing in like the angle, like the 90-degree angle that you're standing is related through this and that. And dude, I really cannot do any justice, but you should check out those videos. But it was this whole walkthrough experience. It wasn't just that he had covered his walls and bookshelves and book spines with paintings, but it had a philosophy to go with it. It was this whole story. You start here on the little part on the floor where he started his paintings on 9/11, then you walk through, and then it's this whole journey of the human soul. It's this rich and profound dance with all of these different types of archetypal forms and wisdom traditions, and I'm sure he has a Bible in there and Quran, and he had original 16th century books on alchemy, which is like so cool. So this guy really was the real deal when it comes to esotericism and alchemy and things like Jungian archetypes and all of that stuff that I'm into. He's surrounding himself with all of this stuff. After years and years and years, he's turned it into this incredibly dynamic and rich experience inside the library of his own home. The thing that was really unique to our experience is that he knew we were a band. So he was using all of this rich musical metaphors for language. He was talking about the process of making art and how there's a rhythm to it. When you create, that's the beat, and then you rest, and then there's a beat. And he was talking about the consistency of making art and how that is like a rhythm. He was also making the point that everybody has this greatness inside of them. People who haven't achieved any type of success or fame or whatever, or a certain skill level, they see all of these great heroes of music as different from them, or some kind of unachievable status, which Leigh McCloskey made it very clear that you have a Hendrix inside of you, or a McCartney, or whatever example of a musician you want to use, that you have that within yourself too. And he was making that very clear. So one of the most mind-blowing moments was when we were just looking at his paintings. And I remember he had this one painting which is called Phoenix, Rise of the Phoenix, or Birth of the Phoenix, something about Phoenix. And it's this huge canvas that's like 6 feet wide, 4 feet tall, and it's this just brilliant piece of art, and it's just so moving, and like you can tell it has some kind of like cosmic energy behind it. And I was just standing there just with my jaw dropped, and I was like, how did you do this? I really want to know how someone can get to a point where they do something like this. And he just shrugged his shoulders and he said, I don't know. And I think that really comes down to the fact that he's not deliberately creating these things. He is just following his instinct and allowing his unconscious materials to flow out, which is why I think his art is so great. I believe that it's coming from something very, very deep within the human psyche. And because he's just so masterful and skilled, that he's able to channel that stuff. Ultimately, that is my goal too. Whatever it is, whatever energy and power that he's channeling through his art, that's what I want to do too, eventually. So here I am, seeing it in the flesh and seeing the person that made it and asking him how he does it. He says, I don't know. And I'm still kind of asking him a little bit, you know, like, where do I start? because you may not be able to tell me how to create this painting, but what do I need to do to start heading in this direction? And he went and grabbed something. He grabbed his book about the tarot, and he said, this is going to be a great place to start. And he handed me his book about the tarot, where he redrew all of the symbols, he redrew all of the cards for the different tarot archetypes, and he went into extreme depth talking about the significance of all of these archetypes and basically saying that all of these live within you. And this is a new perspective that I had never heard when it comes to tarot, and he made it seem very open-minded and just a way to kind of map out the different personalities within a human. I'm gonna link a video with Leigh talking about the tarot. Just like the rest of this, I think it's better said by him. So we go to the backyard, and even in his back porch, he has this amazing painting that's just like human size, and it's called Sophia in Pink, and that had its own story to go with it and its own philosophy. So we're just getting this insane download of information and inspiration. So we go out to the backyard, and this stuff is still unreal. He has these two giant fluffy cats. They're just like purely white coats, and both of his cats looked like this. And he had a dog that looked like that too, a giant white fluffy dog with just like beautiful fur. They each had an eye that was blue and green. And apparently this is a thing called the mystic's eye. So he had found these animals that were just like these beautiful creatures, and they each had one blue eye, one green eye. And it was hard to believe that what I was seeing was real, because it was just so unusual. And keep in mind, we're in Malibu for the first time, so we're just like in this paradise within a paradise, and it was really something else. So we were on our way to leave, and unfortunately, I had to turn down his offer for the book because broke musicians, we didn't have money, and it was $50. And so I told him I would send him a check later, and I would order it later and get it mailed. When we were getting back into the van to head to our show that night, Leigh comes running out, and he was like, hey, you know, like, here, I want you to just have it. So he gave us this book for free because he really believed that we would benefit from the knowledge. That was a very generous and kind thing to do, because it shows me, you know, that he really cares about disseminating this information and spreading wisdom and spreading inspiration. He signed the book, he wrote much inspiration, nice to meet you, and signed it, and I still have it to this day. Because I didn't have the money at the time, I still had it as a thing in the back of my mind that I did want to support him. So actually very recently, I got in contact with him. I ordered some of his books directly from him. So it feels good now to say that I did ultimately pay him back. That was the end of that visit, but the craziness was not over. So we had our show that night. We played in Hollywood on Sunset Strip. It was supposed to be this big deal, but it turned out nobody was there. So we played our show in Hollywood to nobody. Really, the other bands, I had one friend that lived there that came to see the show. So really dead show, kind of defeating, but we had a really great day before that. And after Leigh's house, we got to visit El Matador Beach in Malibu, and it was really beautiful. So we were still having a good time. So the gig is over, and we didn't really make any money. We had booked a show in Colorado the next day. It was in West Colorado, but still really far. It was a 16-hour drive. So at 2 in the morning in LA, the bartender hooked me up with a really strong coffee that he put like 3 shots of espresso in, and we were off. So we start driving, and we were using the Waze app to navigate. And it turns out that the main highway that goes from LA to Las Vegas was closed for like a 70-mile length. It was just horrible traffic. Like, we would have been stuck there and not made our show if we would have went that way. So Waze takes us on this back road through some mountains, and we're like, all right, this is pretty cool. But then we get to a point where there's no roads and it's just dirt. And the van that we have has very poor shocks. So we were just like, just bouncing up and down, and it was like, whoa, we're really out here. And the drive was treacherous. Like, we were going around mountains, it was dark. There was a lot of other cars doing the same thing because of that highway closure. We even came across this bus that there was like this corner of the mountain, you know, like a curve, and there was no like barricade going off that edge. And somehow we saw a bus that was like over this curve. Like the front wheels were like going on the road and the back wheels were going on the road, but the bus itself was like hanging over nothing, over the edge of this mountain. And we were like, Jesus, like what is going on? And it was just this extremely treacherous and exhausting drive. I really felt like that was our hero's journey, but it happened in reverse order. You know, like I feel like we should have gone through that and then saw Leigh McCloskey's house. It turned out the opposite. We had this amazing start to our day, and just by 3 in the morning, we were going through hell that night. So eventually we did get out of there. When the sun came up, my shift of driving was over. So I hopped in the back seat and closed my eyes. And right before I passed out, I had a vision in my head of like a golden wheel in the sky. I would later find out that that is one of Leigh McCloskey's paintings. So I guess it had burned into my mind and it came out at that time as something significant. So the fact that I saw this and connected the dots later really blew my mind. So my main takeaways from this were about developing the archetypes. So this is such a deep and unconscious thing that it's really hard for me to say much about it, but I do feel like when I read about his archetypes through the tarot book that he gave me, that they did have an effect, and some of these energies that are discussed are very important in being a whole psychic entity. Again, super hard to explain, but it was important and it was useful. And I actually really want to go back and revisit that stuff again, because I do feel like it had an influence on me, and I can even point to a few certain songs that my band made that I can say seem to be influenced by particular archetypal energies, like the ones Leigh McCloskey showed us in his book. Another big takeaway is just his improvisational approach, where it's like he's a jazz musician and that he's not trying to intellectualize his artistic impulses. And I really relate to that and take a lot of inspiration from that. Really, he is like the ultimate Jedi Master that I look up to. I really want to make music that looks like this guy's art. An amazing time. I really recommend that you check out the videos of tours of that library, because words just do not do it justice. Really inspiring guy, really inspiring meeting, and it was just incredible, man. It's almost pointless to talk about it, but I just really wanted to share the experience and the story, because maybe it will be interesting to someone else. Maybe it'll be interesting to you. Yep, I think that's gonna be it for today, guys. So thanks for hearing my story. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you when I get to make my next video. All right, peace.